this is not the time to reverse any reform. This is the time to do more reforms, because there are still structural weaknesses that if we don't reform those, the security network, our security network is not helping our economy. It is not. Decisions are not taken at the local level.
Welcome to the Economy and Politics Conversation. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will be looking at Nigeria's latest GDP figures and the path to sustain growth. My guest joining me in the studio for this conversation is Dr. Ogho Okiti, an economist and CEO of ThinkBusiness Africa. It's great to have you, Dr. Okiti, in our studio.
Thank you so very much,
Thank you.
Ottoabasi. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. So we're looking at Nigeria's first quarter 2026 recent gross domestic product growth report. Of course, the GDP grew by 3.89% year on year. Of course, I know there have been quite some debates around that growth, and it showed expansion, growth in the strongest figure in the decade when you look at first quarter growth in a decade. But looking at that performance, I would like to understand how this expansion reflects genuine productivity recovery, because that's always been the question in growth, productivity. Or is this just base effects in terms of the assessment of this growth?
What we have seen is year-on-year increases, especially since 2023. So if you look at Q1 figure for 2023, it was about 2.31%. Now in Q1 2026, we have 3.89%. So that means in the space of 3 years, we're having what we call a nearly double rate of GDP growth in the economy. So that's number one. What is also in that data is that if you look at the Q1 2023, and you look at Q1 2024, and you look at Q1 2025, you will see a constant increase in the GDP growth rate. So from 2.31, I think the one for 2024 was about 2.89 thereabout. Then in 2025, it was 3.13%, and now in 2026, it's 3.89. What that means is not just that we are seeing a nearly double GDP rate of growth, we are also seeing momentum in the Nigerian economy. So in the past 3 years, we have been seeing constant momentum from one level of economic growth to the other. So that's it. Now coming to the question, okay, what does this figure actually mean, especially when you break it down into sectors? The contributions, and I'm not necessarily saying the growth rate of each country, I'm saying the contribution in terms of whether the sizes of those contributions, they've been coming from trade, information and communication, banking and financial services, crop production, and the list of those is actually manufacturing. So what we have seen here is we have seen positive momentum in the economy. However, we have not yet seen a deep and greater level of that economic growth translating to jobs and to higher level of income. But that is not to take away the tremendous achievement of nearly doubling the rate of growth in the economy. What it means is that there's still so much work that we need to do to deal with the structural weaknesses in the Nigerian economy.
You've just preempted my next part of this conversation, that yes, we've seen momentum in growth, but not translated to the impact on citizenry, because several analysis, ProShare and Partnership Economy Associates has also reviewed this Q1 2026 GDP, and has also highlighted that yes, there's been improvement in the growth trajectory, but transitioning from the reforms that we've seen by this current administration, which marked 3 years last week, Friday, transitioning from that reform to the level where it creates ease for the households and reduces the cost of doing business for businesses across the country remains that challenge. So at what point do we, or what's the timeline that we'll begin to see this transition whereby it restores stability on one hand, but delivers measurable welfare gains to the households and eases the pressure on businesses?
I can't give you any timeline, but what I can tell you is I can show what I think is the path to do that. But first, let me make the point that the growth trajectory we have seen in the last 2 years is expected when you do a reform of that magnitude and removing economic distortions. So you are expected to see some levels of productivity gain, some level of investment, which obviously, like taking advantage of the preconditions that existed, the economic preconditions that existed, led to that growth. So you can first of all say two things. One, the economic reforms that we saw in the last 3 years led to the doubling of this growth trajectory. We can't, that is the great point. The second is that it is expected. If you look at Vietnam in the 80s, they were doing about 4%, 4.2%. Immediately after their reforms, in the next 2-3 years, they started doing about 8%. The same thing with India in the late 80s. They were doing about 3.2%. In fact, they used to call it the Indian growth rate, because it was like remained at that level for a long time, like we had 2% for about a decade. So they also carried out reforms and they doubled their rate of growth also over a 2-3 year period. So in terms of what was responsible for the doubling of our growth trajectory is the reforms. In terms of was it expected or is it in line with expectations when you do a reforms of this nature, that is also expected. Now, we've taken those two out of I'm now coming straight to your question.
Yes.
Why have we not seen lives? When I mean like welfare, let me use welfare gains. We have not seen the kind of welfare gains that basically the reform should be able, that should be the goal of every reform, or because the goal of every reform is to higher growth, and if you have higher growth, we should begin to see some significant welfare gains. So why have we not seen it? It goes back to those preconditions, and until we deal with those preconditions, and I will mention about 3 or 4, I call them the structural weaknesses in Nigerian economy. The first one is power, and I will link them to the cost of doing business. Until we fix power, we cannot spoil the kind of industrial activity, industrial jobs, industrial income that we need, which we expect will not translate to those welfare gains that you're talking about. So first one is power. The second one, which is also very, very important, is the very large, and in my own opinion, excessive large informal sector. What that large informal sector means is that we have too many entrepreneurs. We have too many.
We have 40 million plus MSMEs.
Just minor selling 2 cups of this, 2 cups of that. So we are not able to aggregate the benefits of a growing economy when you have that large informal sector. The third one is energy issue or infrastructure issue. So you can go on, but the 2 major ones are power and large informal sector because of the implications. And let me try and share some of those implications. When you have a large informal sector, one, it has difficulty. I mean, policy. Policy needs to permit, and policy means that, okay, for instance, if you have an energy policy, the industry should be able to capture those benefits.
Clusters should benefit.
Yes. If you have a manufacturing benefit, the industry should be able to capture that. If you have a trade policy, and now, especially now there are so many significant changes in trade. So whether it's in relation to ECOWAS, whether it's in relation to AfCFTA, so there are so many changes in that area. However, are the businesses that we have, set up in a way for them to be able to take advantage of that? So it is those structural weaknesses that I think we need to take care of. And if we don't deal with those structural weaknesses, we may not be able to actually not only translate the gains that we have seen in GDP growth trajectory, but we may also not be able to attain that high and sustained level of it. So, and I remember two other ones, and I think they're very, very important. One is by the reform itself, in combination with that weak structural weaknesses, we are seeing a greater level of inequality. So you have, for instance, I don't know if you're aware, the GDP per capita last year was about 1,250. Yes, if I'm correct. Yes, GDP per capita. In 2026, it is projected to reach 1,500. So that means in the space of 1 year, Nigeria has been able to add about 200 plus per capita. However, who are the people that captured that increase in per capita? So you have significant economic inequality, largely because one, the reforms have been able, the people that have are able to, because capital is still very expensive. So people that have capital are able to actually build more on capital because capital is expensive. But because you also have many micro, they are not able to actually key into the value chain of those reforms. So there's inequality. The fourth one, structural weakness, which is also very, very important. So if you look at the history of those Vietnam, you look at India, they did not have these preconditions at the level that we have them. It was not as perverse. The fourth one, very important, skills gaps. So you have skills gaps reflect in the economy in two major ways. One, it reflects in productivity gains. So you don't have people, so you have businesses like this, and you don't have people that are ready to key into the productivity gains. That's number one. Then second, because they are also not in that job or formal sector, they are also not able to benefit from the aggregate. So if you look at those four structural weaknesses, they are things that we need to deal with. And if we don't deal with them, we will continue to have the debate of, are these growth numbers fluke? They are not fluke. However, for it to translate to a wider welfare gains for majority of Nigerians, we need to deal with power, we need to deal with skills gap, we need to deal with the large informal sector. I hope dealing with those three will not affect the inequality that we see in the Nigerian economy.
Very interesting, because when you look at it, we now need to look at the reforms. Like you said, we want to avoid reform fatigue, because one of the things that have been said over time, even in the recent ProShare and Economy Associates analysis on the first quarter 2026 GDP, is that consistency in reform. So we want to look at a situation where we're avoiding reform fatigue. So do you see that scenario where we can avoid the reform fatigue and policy reversals, particularly as we have seen the political season has kicked off already? I mean, just noting that the major parties have concluded their primaries, preparing for the general elections ahead of 2027. The pressures will be there. But you've highlighted these structural issues: power, the large informal sector, skills gap, and of course, the need to address income inequality, which the Nobel laureate, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, mentioned globally is something that every government must address. So what are the solutions in addressing this and ensuring that we don't experience this reform fatigue, which has been the bane of our country?
I don't think we should experience reform fatigue, because let's be clear, we've had two broad reform regime. in Nigeria's economic history. The first one, I would say, under President Olusegun Obasanjo, that was largely fiscal process reform. So we had the SS code account, you have the HEMTEF, you have there was, I mean, but they were largely focused on dealing with then you have the DMO, Debt Management Office reform. Those were very, very
pension
critical.
Reforms too.
Pension reforms. Yes. So those were very, very critical reforms dealing with the fiscal process because it was just cumbersome. Before then, there was no clarity of maybe current expenditure. There was no platform for savings. Fantastic set of reforms. Now, between then and the last 3 years, what we had was tweak here and there until the last 3 years. In the last 3 years now, we have now had what I believe are the two most profound, fundamental, and consequential economic reforms in Nigerian history. You cannot beat the profoundness, the fundamentalness, and of course the consequences of these economic reforms. The removal of fuel subsidy and the liberalization of exchange rate. And like I said, it is the result of that you are seeing now in the GDP growth numbers. Having said that, I have argued privately and in public, like I'm doing now, this is not the time to reverse any reform. This is the time to do more reforms because there are still structural weaknesses that if we don't reform those, the security network, our security network is not helping our economy. It is not. Decisions are not taken at the local level. Insecurity, power, they've done the power one. Now states can do power, can decentralize power, they've done power. Need to do security. Road infrastructure. Why is the federal government involved in the building of all the roads in the country? So what I'm saying is that part of the reforms we need to continue is that decisions are taken at the local level. And we develop a system that ensure that this is sustained and that these decisions, we cannot develop a system for that decision. I don't know if you get my point, but it should be at the local level where it can really, really affect either his politics or governance or gains or welfare gains at the local level. That is what we need to see more of. It is not that we need to reverse what has already been done.
Yeah, so the key word is strengthen the current reforms. No reform fatigue. And we hope whatever is the outcome of the elections, there will be consideration on these major reforms that we need to consolidate and not reverse them and look at how it impacts the economy. Let's look at the role of states. States are very critical in driving these reforms. We've seen the macroeconomic reforms at the national level, but states have to be key drivers in areas of infrastructure, investment, competitiveness, creating the enabler, like you said, the large informal sector across 36 states. Human capital reinvestment is also very important, and states have a role to play. What is your assessment, also looking at it that 29 states marked 3 years in administration last Friday too? And what is critical?
That's basically what I have just explained. We need a system that continues to allow decisions taken at the appropriate level. And the appropriate level may be state, but the appropriate level may actually be also agencies under the state. So, I mean, if you look at the way we operate at the moment, even the governors take all the decisions. The governors take all the decisions. So when the governor does not take any decision, nothing happens. So if it is fire, how do we ensure that we protect Lagosians from fire, for instance? Can we take those decisions without the governor? how do we ensure that the sanitation or wherever hands, how do we do it without the government? Once there is policy, can we build systems that allows the policy to keep reinventing, readjusting itself? But there is this notion of one man taking decisions, and that is where the problem is. So it's not only federal to state, it's also within the state who is best to take these decisions. Allow the professionals to take decisions, allow the professionals to make the adjustment when necessary, and we will see things move. But when we are always waiting, that is the problem. We are always waiting for one person to take decisions. That is where I think the problem is. We have to move from a country which is of 200 million plus, but in which decisions, economic decisions, vital economic decisions are taken maybe just by less than 40 people. I think that's where the problem is.
So we need to deepen decentralization of power. Even the local governments have to be stronger too, because there's some roles that local governments are playing that the state governments are playing.
Yes.
Governors are actually powerful. Even in the US, I just saw a recent development in California where the governor just made a very strong comment, and it's seemingly powerful, but I believe those kind of decisions also will be contested by law. So what we're trying to say is that governors have their power, build a system that checks this excesses.
System.
And then
it's not just about governors. I don't want to say about president, about governors.
No, I understand what you're saying.
We need to build a system.
To have a robust, decentralized system.
Decentralized system
where one person doesn't take overriding decisions.
Exactly. That allow decisions to be made and allow policies to reinvent themselves.
Yeah.
That is the point.
Sure.
Yes. So, for instance, if you have roadworks in Nigeria, most cases you have roadworks. Go and find out, just to an extent. So why has this road not been done? Oh, governor has not approved. So meanwhile, the governor may not even see the road in his 8 years if he gets 2 terms as governor. So why are we waiting? And if you go to the federal government sometimes too, there will also be some issues that you'll be wondering, why are they waiting on Mr. President? So what I'm trying to say is, as a country, we need to look at that structural weaknesses. How do we make faster economic decisions? How do we make faster civil decisions that we don't have to wait for one man all the time? It's not a criticism of any government. We have been here since independence. And I call it the military fatigue, but we need to move away from that. And that has implications for economic growth, the way economic growth is shared, and the way the benefits of economic growth is actually shared as welfare gains to Nigerian citizens. Yes.
So from what you're saying, can Nigeria sustain this macroeconomic recovery, this GDP growth momentum into 2027, given the, of course, the fiscal pressures we're going to see ahead of 2027, the general elections, and the need to strengthen fiscal discipline, the issues of investment? And I want you to talk briefly about the investment deal book. Proshia has been advocating that we need to have a deal book that is functional, that unlocks value from our assets, the state enterprises and assets like real estate and the others. We have not gotten traction in that regard.
So first, let's talk on the growth outlook.
Yes.
The growth outlook is very positive, and I will tell you why I genuinely think it's very positive. We have 3.89 growth in GDP in Q1. I so much look forward to Q2, and I will tell you why. Because there was a shock, that started in Q1, so we had some spike in fuel prices, we have some spike in food. They were already high, but we now had another spike because of this shock. So Q2 is very key because it happened in February, right? February, you can say the momentum for Q1 GDP was already in place. So Q2 result is very, very important. Let's see what happens in Q2. That's number one. The second thing, having said that, why I think it's positive and why I think that we may actually see this trajectory for the rest of the year is because also coming from reforms, we have managed to build some sort of resilience. Many people may not understand it, but we have managed to build some sort of resilience in the last 3 years. Let me tell you through 3 things what I mean by that resilience. In previous economic shock, 3 things are likely to happen. One is that there would have been fuel queues in the country. This time around, even though the fuel prices went up, there was no disruption to production because prices went up, but we still had access to fuel products. That's very critical. It's very, very important. And I don't want Nigerians to forget these changes. Of course, not only because of government policy, also because of the Dangote refinery. So first one, we did not have disruption that we usually have. This disruption usually makes us lose 5, 10, sometimes 15 working days. Yeah. And that is serious productivity and production that we lose as a nation. So this time we did not have that. Second, which is also important and tied to economic reform, is that we have not seen significant pressure on the Naira that we would have seen in the past. In fact, as a result of that, in the last few months since the shock, the Naira has actually strengthened. I don't want to use it, but strengthened rather than depreciated. In other times, we would have been forced by now to depreciate, or let me say devalue the Naira in order to prevent significant outflow of capital. So these are the gains that I don't think we should take lightly as a nation. I think we should celebrate. Have I said we are there yet? No. I am just saying that we have made some sort of progress. However, to see significant improvement in welfare gains, to see significant reduction in poverty, for us to start seeing significant increases in income level across board, you have to deal with what are the obstacles to serious production and productivity gains across sector. And those are the structural weaknesses I mentioned about: power, skills gap, large informal sector, and hopefully dealing with those 3 will also affect the level of the inequality gap in the country.
And then the deal book.
The deal book. The deal book is a matter of principle for me. Yeah. There are so many assets, whether it's at federal or at state, but let's stick to federal. I believe, going back to the same thing, decisions at only one level, that is the problem. So if you ask, they'll probably say they're waiting for someone to take decisions. And if nobody takes that decision, nothing actually happens. So as a nation and as a matter of principle, we need to optimize our assets. And there are many, many assets that we can optimize. And we need to do that faster. And I believe that is what the deal book is speaking to. And I agree you should.
Yes, definitely. And I would like to get your lessons. You know, I mean, you've been a top media executive, an economist. You've been in policy advisory and, of course, working with critical policymakers. What has been the lessons in terms of governance, fiscal architecture, and reforms? And in adding to that, how do you see Nigeria in the African picture, the developments we're seeing between National Monetary Fund and countries like Senegal, developments in Ethiopia? How do you see Nigeria positioning itself in the African region?
I will talk about my lessons last. First, let me just go straight to Africa. Yeah. Africa is not tomorrow. No. Africa is today. Now, we are seeing so many changes, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Senegal, whether it's Mauritius, whether it's Mozambique. There are so many changes happening across Africa country, whether it's Togo. I hope Nigerians can actually travel more within Africa. Most of if you just go, many people now, maybe they're booking their summer holidays, or it's the US, the UK. I understand that because that's always where we've always been to. But there are tremendous things happening in other African economies, and I think they should be encouraged. Not only within the ECOWAS, but also within the AfCFTA region. The plan for the Dangote refinery for East Africa, I mean, that is an humongous plan that will completely change the energy landscape in East Africa. The same way Dangote refinery has changed the energy landscape in Nigeria and West Africa. So these are things happening, and they should be commended. African governments, are they perfect? No. Are they there yet? No. But we should also commend the improvements that we are seeing all over the continent. So AfCFTA is promising. I believe so much in AfCFTA, because you have a market of 200 million, then you have a market of 1.4 billion. That is something that I think as Nigerians, and of course every other business across the continent, should take advantage of. All we are talking about is productivity gains, income gains, and of course connecting Africa at the very, very deepest level. And you can only do that by economists. Our aviation needs to improve. Africa connections within the continent needs to improve. There's so much conversations around the visa. I'm happy that that is going in the right direction. That needs to improve as well. So every other thing that we require to connect, to do business, and to improve our productivity gains are things that I feel we should pursue as a continent. In terms of my lessons, I believe I've been sharing what I call my lessons. I mean, experiences are not just built in 10 years or in 20 years, they have built over time. Yes, I've had 2 experiences in government now, and the things I'm sharing are me now. Is my experience, is not just my experience, also my knowledge. So I use my knowledge, combine it with what I see, and that is just basically what I am sharing with you. The reforms are, for instance, I've told you about the history of Nigerian economic reforms too. Have we had enough of that? No, we need more reforms. We need more reforms. It may not be in the same areas, but we need more reforms. If you go to the UK, the US, they are still doing reforms. Yes. Reforms just basically means policy to move you from where you are to where you want to go to. So if you don't do that, you probably get stuck at some level. And the reasons why reforms are usually necessary is because economies don't stay static. It's very, very dynamic. So as things are moving, there may be some dislocations that you also want to correct. So that is one major lesson that I take from government. And of course, the second one, which I've also shared here, we are not making faster economic decisions. I don't know how to buttress that, but that is also one lesson from, it's not lesson that I just acquired, but it's always been that we don't make faster economic decisions. And I think we need that. I can give many examples, but I think it's not necessary at the point.
Yeah, it's not necessary. I mean, what you just said, the last part is very important. Faster economic decision processes are very important, especially when we see the geopolitics, the impact of what happened in the Middle East, and why governments need to come out quickly with stabilization plans to move the economy forward. But of course, we don't take for granted your commitment to national development over the years. Dr. Ogho Okiti, an economist and CEO of ThinkBusiness Africa. Thank you for taking our time to come to our studio to have this conversation. And it's so insightful to see the structural weaknesses you've highlighted and what we can do. And the most important thing, sustain these reforms, but link it to addressing issues of inequality and reducing poverty and achieving sustained growth, which everybody wants to experience in the country. Thank you once again for taking out this time to discuss Nigeria's latest GDP figures and pathway for sustained growth in Nigeria. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you, Ottoabasi, for inviting me. Thank you
very much. Thank you. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, visit the ProShare website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage further. Till we come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socio-economic developments around you, because it's the wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.